Hey there, this is Jenny Chen. I'm the founder of 3D Heals. Welcome to the Lattice podcast, the official podcast for 3D Heals. This is where you will find fun but in-depth conversations with technological game changers, creative minds, entrepreneurs, rule breakers, and more, focusing on how we can use 3D technologies like 3D printing and bioprinting to reinvent healthcare and even life sciences. This podcast will also include AMA or Ask Me Anything sessions, past Instagram live interviews with influencers, and other direct engagements with our tribe.
Hi, everyone.
Very good. Thank you, Zsuzsanna, for joining us today, and thanks for everybody who are tuning in for this episode of Instagram Live. Who we have today is Zsuzsanna Puspokis. She is the co-founder and chief operating officer for Rhino 3D Medical. I've been following you guys for quite a while. And so Zsuzsanna, you actually just graduated pretty recently in 2016 after you completed your PhD in a Swiss technology Institute of Technology.
Yes.
And actually your study was focusing on biomedical imaging. And after that, Zsuzsanna went on to work at a hospital, I guess, focusing on biomedical imaging for another year, where you are acquainted how to optimize data acquisition with CT and MRI data. And then after that, in 2017, you founded Rhino 3D Medical, which is an incredible startup that I'm having. I think there's a lot of potential, and I want to give you some time to talk about that today. So Zsuzsanna, how did you decide that there are quite a few questions I have for you. Is why did you decide to start or co-found Rhino 3D, and why using Rhino as the base for your app?
All right. So thanks a lot for the introduction. You said 4 years or 5 years ago I graduated as a PhD, and actually for me it already seems like a very, very long time ago. So Miracle has been co-founded in January 2018, but the story dates really, really back during my PhD studies, where I met the other co-founders, Daniel and Pablo, and we were working on different image representations and segmentation. And in particular, what was interesting is really to find a segmentation of specific anatomies, and then give the right to the user to edit this kind of segmentation in a very easy and handy way. And after my PhD, that's true, I spent a year at the local hospital here in Switzerland. And there I was working on a project of the European Union. And I was really gaining a lot of experience in MRI image acquisition, and also a little bit in CT image processing. And during these times, we had a lot of active discussions with my previous colleagues from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. And we really had the idea, okay, let's try to bring it to the industry, what we were working on for so long, and try to see if it can bring benefit and added value to the people that we think it could be. And back then, it was still unclear for us what we exactly wanted to achieve. We knew we loved 3D printing, we knew we loved the technology and interdisciplinary field of a little bit engineering, informatics, mathematics, and biology or the medical field, but it was still unclear what would be the exact goal. So at the beginning, we were still somehow finding our road, and we built up a very strong strategic partnership with Rhinoceros. I think we originally chose Rhinoceros because it's one of the most common used software for organic and freeform design. So if you think of solid modeling, this is something else. This is really the organic, freeform, smooth modeling, and this is somehow the word where we are coming from. And we gain experience, let's say, in developing plugins and features with Rhino for Rhino. and we established this partnership first with the European office of McNeil, which is in Barcelona, and they really supported us from the beginning. And then finally, I think when we came with the medical idea, it really became like a long-term partnership, because somehow Rhino is lacking this medical image. Let's say they are pretty strong in architecture, in product design, in industrial design, but not for medical imaging. So I think what we are trying to do is to build like a complete medical imaging platform with a little rhinoceros heart within that.
So before meeting you, I didn't even know the existence of Rhinoceros as a software, because I'm not an engineer. The number of CAD design software I know is a handful. But recently I realized how much people love Rhinoceros actually. And you've encountered a variety of software with CAD feature. What do you think, one, Rhinoceros actually does better? You mentioned freeform, which I'm not really sure what that concept means. If you can explain it to us, that would be great. And to compare to the other CAD design software, what is the advantage of using Rhino?
I think other CAD design software is mostly used for like mechanical design, like designing machines where you have a solid volume, like you define a rectangle, for example, and then you do extrusions. Solid modeling is like when you give a Play-Doh to a kid, and then he really manages to create smooth shapes all around that has not really like a volumetric form, but something like very smooth and very curvy, like really a piece of art, let's say.
Cool. And I know that you brought a couple of examples today for us to demonstrate the power behind Rhino 3D medical software. Why don't you show us those?
Yes, so I've prepared 2 examples. So maybe let's talk a little bit in general about the company, and then I quickly show my models.
Go right ahead.
What we try to do is to connect the medical imaging modalities like CT and MRI imaging to your 3D printer as easily as you would print out your document from the computer with a regular printer. So this is the main idea, and we are focusing on 3 main areas, which is CMF surgery, orthopedics, and trauma. And my first example will be from the from the CMF world. So one of the most common fractures that you could have is the fracture of the orbital floor. And if maybe perfect. I can come a little bit closer and add a light. So here you can see the orbital floor, which is the healthy side. And this one is the side where you can see the fracture down there.
Yeah.
If it goes through the camera. So here the preparation for the surgery is pretty complex in the sense that you have to insert a plate that will have to cover the whole fracture. And you have to be very precise with that, and it has to cover the entire hole. Otherwise, the tissue behind it can come over. So probably in terms of medical terms, you could explain the surgical procedure better than me. But I think having a print in your hand, which is very easy to prepare, like from the moment you obtain the DICOM images or NIFT images, the CT scan of the patient, you can select the area that is interesting to you, and then you can directly send to your desktop printer, and you have it just before the surgery. You can already select which implant you want to use, how to pre-bend it. You can discuss with your colleagues the entire procedure, not just based on like a stack of 2D images that are in your computer, but having really like a tactile information in your hand can really help. Also, we can talk about patient communication, and all that. So what we believe is that if you have these models, it can really help, to go to the operating room where all the questions are basically already answered, and such that the time you spend in the operating room can be much shortened, which is, okay, in one hand, it's good because it saves cost, but it's also less procedural risk for the patient. And this is, I think, what we are really trying to focus on.
I think it's everybody's dream that if we just push a button, then we can print out a model. So on your website, it says Rhino 3D Medical is the fastest software to make that happen. Why is it so fast? How do you guys make it so fast?
So what I believe is that there are some other software that is really complex and very high level. The issue I see is that most of them are really targeting engineers, and they are focusing on different kind of applications. So if I would like to use an analogy, I would say, for example, if you just want to crop an image, you wouldn't buy Photoshop, right?
Yeah.
So I think the key is really that we want to give a tailored solution to the surgeons or to the medical professionals such that they can use their desktop 3D printer with them and then directly just focus on the workflow and the operations that they need to have or that they will go through, and they don't need to learn years of becoming half an engineer to be able to operate such a software. And I think in some sense our main competition is not like other companies. I think we are giving a complementary solution. What we are really facing as an enemy is like the not knowing of the technology, the lack of using 3D printing within hospitals. So I just read recently a statistics that around 99% of the hospitals are not at all exploiting the technology. And there are many barriers that I see, and one of them is that if you want to invest now as a hospital in 3D printing, typically the option you have is very costly. You need to buy some huge industrial 3D printer. You have to hire a group of engineers. And then if you have something to print out, then you send your request to this department, and then they will process it depending on their priority list. Or you engage a third-party company where also, patient rights come in. It's confidential data that you are handling, so you can engage like a third-party company that will do it for you and then ship it for you, and then maybe the print arrives within a week. So this is now very encouraging, let's say, to jump into this 3D printing. And what we feel is that it also aligned with the perception of people with 3D printing. So either they imagine it as like skyrocketing, or something very, very geeky that, IT geeks are doing in their, backyard between playing video games. So I think there's a very broad spectrum in between, and it's exactly where we try to position ourselves to really make this technology accessible for everyone who could benefit from it. And I think the desktop 3D printing, how the industry is evolving, it's really in this direction. You can buy very reasonable 3D printers for a couple of $1,000s. And I think this really has the quality such that you can do your prints within your office, and then you can use it to have a better understanding of the anatomy of your patient.
So one of the other applications I know you guys do is cervical guides, which I find very useful because, if anything, one step beyond just having an anatomical model at hand is like something you can actually use in the operation. Does your software make it easy to produce these guides? Because that requires you to know some kind of engineering. You have to have some kind of engineering background. For people like me, I'm a radiologist. I wonder, can I use your software to design guides for my surgeons?
So exactly, that's the second step that I just wanted to show you. So the first model, it was printed with an SLA printer. This one I printed just with a filament-based printer, but you can already see the vertebrae. They are cervical vertebrae.
Yeah.
And here the procedure is pretty complex if you want to insert pedicle screws. So probably all the medical doctors, they know that we are talking about like 4 or 5 millimeter in terms of height, and then you really have to be precise if you put the pedicle screw from the right angle, because otherwise the nerve root that is around will be damaged and it can cause a serious lifelong problem for the patient. So typically there are 2 ways to insert pedicle screws. There are minimum invasive surgeries, and there's really the open surgery with either the freehand technique or with surgical guides. As we see, even though these minimal invasive surgeries, they are taking place, if the procedure is complex or risky, it's still the open technique that is used. And I think it's very useful to be able to create a guide very quickly for the patient, such that it really adapts to the anatomy of the vertebra, such that we are really 100% sure that the way you are drilling the hole and placing the screw adapts perfectly to the anatomy of your patient. So with our software, we really tried to make like an easy workflow for the doctors. And this module we have developed together with our collaborators in Brazil and in London in the United Kingdom. So here the idea was to define different guide models to the cervical spine. And then if you read our blog post on our website, this is the place of publicity, then you can find actual use cases where surgeons were using our guide techniques for the thoracolumbar spine.
Mm-hmm.
So here you can really see for each vertebra, you can really find a guide. And then you can also adapt
closer to the camera.
Sorry?
Can you hold it closer to the camera?
Sorry. So you can also like design this base part such that it really fits. It really fits to that part, and this you can also close such that, you know, when you place it there, then it will really just hold itself. So it's more to show the different options, and we are really talking, you know, about screws that are like a couple of millimeters thick. So you really have to be precise and you have to do it fast. So that's what we are working on right now. So I don't say we have a magical solution yet, but let's say we are on the way.
Well, first of all, I'm going to post your blog link on after this video. 2 is there is a question from Rhino Odom. It's relevant. It says, how does the quality of medical imaging and then the variances in the type of medical imaging, I guess CT versus MRI versus ultrasound, affect the amount of geometry?
So with ultrasound, I think we have less collaboration. So if you have some images to send us, then I would be happy to assess it together with you. Typically with CT and MRI imaging, we were having pretty good results.
Do you have some kind of quality control or validation process for that?
Yes. So anyway, there's the medical doctor that is there controlling the whole operation. So we are not like a decision support system. So it's, you know, if I give you the tools, you still have to see, you know, if it makes sense or not. Now we have clinical trials.
Great.
I could say basically in all over all the continents around. We have quite good collaboration in Brazil, Colombia, in the US, in India, etc. In South Africa, and with those collaborations, now we are doing clinical trials, and what we are trying to prove and go through is that really how well these guides fit and are useful during the surgery. And right now we are having very positive feedback.
Yes,
there is another. Also, you know, sorry, you can also.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So if you compare it with software that is already, for example, FDA certified,
Yes.
for most of the cases that concerns bone, like bone on CT or bone on MRI, you don't really see difference.
So I have another question. It's relevant. I think it will lead up to the next topic that we want to talk about. So Makis Iakavos, sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, but he asked, I use open source software like Slicer 3D and Mesh Mixer, which I also do personally. How do you compare your software to the existing open source ones like Blender? I think a lot of people use Blender as well. How do you compare? I mean, I think usability, I think, is a huge thing that you mentioned.
I think it's mainly usability, that you want to get your results quickly. And I think you need to be a little bit a geek to to master Blender and those tools.
Oh, I think you have to.
So what we want is really something that is workflow based and that is, you know, easy to use and that is dedicated for this given task.
So you mentioned that most of the applications of the two cases you demonstrated are in orthopedics and CMF. Why focusing on these two applications? I
think first we started with the CMF surgery because it looked to us like a good case to try out or prove our value. That is pretty common. And then we tested with this community. We worked together with a hospital in New York and in Switzerland. So we arrived with this module. And I think in the meantime, we got a lot of requests from surgeons that they would like to go one step further, not just, you know, to print out a specific part of the anatomy, but also to design guides. And I think one of the important surgeries where guides are really critical is the one that concerns the spine. And then our collaborators were really like pushing us to develop those modules, to tell them what kind of workflow they could use to build their guides. And then after a couple of like successful surgery that we went together, that's what we put our focus on. So probably next steps will be some cutting guides and some implants, for example, a skull implant. Yeah, let's see. So we would like to cover many procedures, as many as possible. Of course, we have to prioritize, but yeah, other modules are coming soon.
Yeah, so one of the common software that I encounter and my colleagues encounter is Mimics from Materialize, and they focus on a variety of organ systems, but also, you know, organ system based, not like, it can't do everything, but they focus on heart, for example, soft tissue. Is that something that you guys are also going forward with in terms of vascular soft tissue modeling?
So currently we are really focusing on hard tissue, like bone on CT and MRI, and for the trauma, cranial, and orthopedic domains. We had some users, or we have some users that are using our software for the lung, or for example for the heart, but I think it's not the majority of our users.
I have another question here. I think it's similar. It says Rhino Medical makes automated rendering to ease the process, but does that affect accuracy?
Rendering, or sorry?
Basically, I think segmentation is what he meant. How do you make sure that you're accurate? Let's say if I'm using your software,
yes,
and I got a model, how do I know that my model is accurate?
Well, I think there's one part that comes from the algorithms that are behind. And second, then the models that you are printing out is really like a one-to-one size. So you can compare it, you know, with your CT images, you can measure it. You can see also during the surgery if it fits or not, but it should fit.
I also have.
How do you measure if Mimics is correct? I don't know.
I think this is definitely an ongoing conversation as to how to validate your accuracy from segmentation to the print. Maybe there's some kind of, those not guides. I'm blanking out the name of it, but calibration tools where you
so
use
this
to
we
make
were
sure your
trying to
machine
do,
is.
or we are really doing to try to compare, for example, our software, for example, with Mimics in terms of precision, because Mimics is already like FDA approved. So we trust that the quality that it's producing is correct. Mm-hmm. And then what we are seeing in our studies is that we match up with this quality. Yeah, actually, with the orbital floor, I think we are even better, because in terms of segmentation, for example, this is a hard problem because the orbital floor is very thin.
Yes.
And to be able to capture it, you have to do some extra maths that comes from the PhD studies we have.
Yeah, I think these little finer details will be important once more and more people are using it. I think that orbital floor discussion is pretty relevant, especially when it comes into contact with all kinds of bones. So there's another question that's also relevant to our ongoing discussion about accuracy is, are you going through some kind of accreditation or some kind of governmental, or like FDA clearance or CE mark clearance, that kind of thing?
Yes, so our plan is now to conclude on the clinical trials and then determine to which clearance we should go first, because we have one in Europe, you have one in the US, and there are some other countries that could serve as a potential market for us, like Brazil with the Anvisa. So we have to see where we go first, and then we will try to grow from that. But it's certainly something that we are jumping in very, very soon.
That sounds great. So I had a conversation last week that was very interesting. Speaking of design for 3D printing, just because you want to make something doesn't mean it's going to print out the way you want it. Mm-hmm. And the mechanical properties are also going to change, depends on how you design it. What kind of features does your software offer so that whatever printer we use, either as SLA or FDM, or maybe even higher end printers, what do you offer for different people with different printers and materials?
So what we can guarantee is the closeness of the surface. So this is something that you will be sure that if you send your guide or your anatomy to the printer, it will be printable. This is a relevant question, and I think if you buy a relatively good printer around like $5,000, there will be no risk. So I can suggest you some good SLA-based printer. I don't want to advertise other companies. Also, with filament-based printers, if it's possible to print multiple filaments, then with the support handling, it's much easier, because then you can remove the support very easily without, actually causing damage to your model. And this question somehow is very interesting to me. So recently I purchased the $300 printer just to see really the limitations. And I was very much positively surprised, let's say, in terms of usability and in terms of the printability of the structures. And what we are trying to give as an advice for the workflow is really something that to help people design guides that will be printable, even if, their means of investment, let's say, is very limited.
Well,
so we will not design, for example, if you designed this specific thing with the guide, if you design like shapes that are really roundish and very, designish, then probably with a cheap SLA printer, you will have more difficulties to print out. But if you, design like a rectangular shape here, which is flat, and then you cut a little bit here, like you make it flat, the tubes, for example, then even with the cheap printer, you can just perfectly print it out, because it will be, on your bed sheet, and then, build plate, and then it can grow the model. And the dimensions and such that even without the support, you can print the tubes relatively well.
Well, last week, our conversation mentioned a $100 3D printer. apparently he was doing well with the $100 printer. So I think the price is going to go down.
I spent too much money on that.
Yes. Well, I'm going to shift the angle of the conversation a little bit before more questions coming in, if we have any more. It's about your entrepreneurship. I'm not very familiar with the European startup scene, but I know that you've been around for a couple of years now as a founder. What are some of the major challenges that you think that are unique to European startup compared to, you know, someone in the Silicon Valley?
I think it's maybe a little bit the mentality about taking a risk. And especially when you're in Switzerland, you start to learn that what is sure is something that you must trust, and that's good. And what is risk is like, let's think about it twice. I think probably in the US, people are jumping on new ideas much quicker, and they really like to go for this kind of adventure. But I think what's the same is that you really have to be committed, and you have to be a little bit maniac about your product, that it will change the world, or at least it will make it a better place. So
how did you
really have
how did you
to
meet your sorry, go on.
So you really have to find, I think, this inner purpose, that every day when you wake up, you feel that your product is great, and then you have to go independently if there are difficulties, if other people disagree. And I think it's the same in the US or in Europe or wherever you are. You need to be dedicated and motivated.
Well, but it sounds like if you're in Europe, you have to have twice the amount of passion to get things going, because there's just not a whole lot of cheerleaders around. Would that be accurate?
Well, it starts, you know, I think over these couple of years that I'm around, I see that there's a positive change in terms of the startup cultures. Also, investors are really getting the appetite, let's say, to put money in startups and to try to shape the future. And I think now, if you think of all these demographic trends about the aging of the population, or the climate change, etc., you see that you have to invest now such that you will have the solutions when it's really trying to collapse the world on you. So I think it's getting better. It's not there yet, like, you know, huge investments going on companies that are either collapsing or skyrocketing the next day. But I think it's a pretty lively ecosystem. So we also got a lot of support, a lot of funds. There are institutions within Switzerland that are doing cheerleading. So we felt a little bit like celebrities in this small ecosystem. But yeah, I think it's a little different also in terms of workforce. I think in the US, if you work for a startup, you know what you are engaging with. In Europe, I think it's still coming, but there's a lot of young people that I think are motivated to do something meaningful, something useful, and not just, you know, work on a feature number 20,000 of a product, but really where they have an impact. And I think it's pretty good, and I really like. When I did my PhD, I was teaching students, and I really love this mentality that now they are having.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And also you're a female co-founder, so I just want to give you a kudos on that. And I'm looking forward when you guys are starting to raise your next round of funding, and happy to reconnect and have another conversation. And also I realized that you have a beta download for, is that a free version, or I can just try it out, or on your website?
Yes, so we have a beta version online that you can download, and then we can have conversations. We are very open to collaborations. So if you have your medical data and you don't really know how to process it, or you want to get involved with our clinical trials, then you can send an email to our support address, and then my colleagues will jump on you.
Awesome, Zsuzsanna. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and thanks for everybody joining us and asking these great questions. The recording is always available on IGTV, but we will post-process it into podcasts and etc. For distribution purposes. So thanks again.
And thank you for having me. And I will keep you updated. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's it for this episode. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 3D Heals, and check out the links in the show notes. See you next time.